Are you guys familiar with Nikos Parfums? If you're familiar and you wear their fragrances, do let me know. Add a comment below so I can find out. I first discovered the brand in 1995, 30 years ago, when they first launched a fragrance called Sculpture Homme, EDT, Eau de Toilette. It comes in Eau de Toilette concentration, created by Michel Almairac. But fast forward to 2022, they launched a Parfum edition of that fragrance, Sculpture Parfum, created by Alienor Massenet. So basically, she took the original formula and made a more concentrated version of the original. As you can see here, Sculpture Homme in Eau de Toilette and Sculpture Parfum in Parfum concentration. But you know what? They've launched other fragrances since Sculpture Parfum. And in this video, I'm going to talk to you about Sculpture Parfum and talk to you about 4 other fragrances in the Sculpture series of fragrances. Find out about Nikos Parfums fragrances coming right up. Thanks so much for tuning in. I'm Sebastian, talking to you about Nikos Parfums. It's a Greek house. Are you familiar with this brand? So they do have clothing as well. And so I don't think they're known for their clothing, but it seems like swimsuit, underwear, shorts, and things like that. I've never seen the brand for clothing, but in the 90s, we did have a men's clothing store in the USA called Sculpture. So I don't think they had any connection with Sculpture, the USA clothing brand, which I believe became Express. But I haven't actually seen Nikos clothing. And of course, I've experienced the fragrances. So when I heard about Sculpture Parfum in 2022, I was very excited. It took me a while to get a bottle. Then I shot a short review of it and then also a full review of the Sculpture Parfum, and then of course comparing it to the original. But the original, like I said, is 30 years old now, and so many years later they launched a Parfum, and it's definitely really, really delicious. So it was originally created by Michel Almairac, as I said. This version was created by Alienor Massenet. And for me, it's sort of like a fougere, very modern, but more in an amber direction. It's a very fresh amber fragrance featuring tonka beans, precious amber, bergamot, bourbon vanilla, orange flowers, lily of the valley, lavender, coriander, and geranium. It's definitely a really great take on a fougere, but not a classic fougere, not just herbs and aromatics and spices and moss and oak moss and things like that. This has warmth to it, and I kind of like it, but it's the kind of warmth there that you can actually get away with wearing it in heat. If you are the type of person that, you know, considers more ambery notes to be fragrances to be worn in the autumn and winter, this is the kind of fragrance you can wear in the summertime, even though it has vanillic ambery notes. But it's a fantastic DNA, I think, and I'm so happy that Nikos Parfums decided to create a Parfum edition of it, and then also carry on that, you know, collection and come up with various other fragrances. This is a really fantastic men's creation from the 90s, definitely one of the highlights. And as I said, there are some others that kind of remind me of one another. In fact, I believe Michel Almairac created another fragrance that is similar to this from another brand, but unfortunately that fragrance is so watered down. This is a great version of this kind of DNA. Really fantastic offering, I think. Both of them are really, really great. You got a much fresher version in the Eau de Toilette, but a more concentrated version in the Parfum. Let me know if you're familiar with this. Add a comment below. Let's quickly smell it. And you can also go catch my short review of this from last year, and then also my full review of this as well. But when you put your nose to this, you're going to smell the tonka, you're going to smell the amber, and you're also going to smell the freshness around it. And of course, lavender comes in, the spices and aromatics come in to kind of like just support all of the notes and ingredients that are here. When I smell this, it totally takes me back to the mid-90s. This is around the time I was wearing not only this, but also Minotaur. I never wore Laura Biagiotti, but I felt like that also had a very similar kind of a styling to it. But it was all about Sculpture in Eau de Toilette, or Sculpture Homme. Really great fragrance. I hope you guys get to try this. Those of you that are men and, you know, buy men's targeted releases and not the unisex niche offerings. I think you should definitely have a bottle of this in your collection. I think it's totally worth it, especially if you have a nostalgia for 90s fragrances and you've got the Parfum edition, which is a lot more concentrated than the Eau de Toilette that came out 30 years ago. So since Sculpture Parfum, Nikos Parfums has launched 4 more fragrances in all different directions. They come in similar bottles. This is the MYKONOS Eau de Parfum. This one is Voyage on Orient. My favorite, by the way. This one is Reverie. And then finally, this one is Air de Lune. So I'm going to tell you about all 4 of these, and definitely worth checking out if you're in the market for new fragrances. And as I said, these, well, the first 2 are male targeted, and I believe the rest of them are unisex. They're definitely unisex to me, but some go a bit more into the feminine direction, and some go more into the masculine direction. So Mykonos Eau de Parfum Fresh from 2023 is a really great watery, aquatic take on a clean citrusy fragrance. What I get from this one are citruses, lots of bergamot, there's lemons here. I get aromatics from it, lavender and basil. I get woodsy notes from this one as well, like vetiver and cedar. And then there's peppery spices. But in addition to these, there's definitely a sea breeze happening here. You definitely pick up something lightly marine, but it's so nicely blended together and it's so clean. I feel like the bottle, color, the feel, is exactly how you wear the fragrance. I think they've captured the bottle perfectly. It's almost like freshly cleaned linens using citruses and aromatics to wash and clean those linens. It smells super amazing, and I feel like in the heat of the summer, this is going to be so fantastic. It might have a little bit of a styling of a traditional eau de cologne, but one that kind of goes slightly sea breezy marine. But again, the notes are beautifully blended together, and this will be a perfect fragrance to wear in the summertime. And if you like to wear these kind of fragrances in the wintertime, it's a nice, uplifting, happy smell. Because I consider citruses and, you know, those kind of notes to be very uplifting notes. When you're having like a down day or something, just give a sniff of this fragrance and it's super, you know, happy, uplifting, and not a downer, dark kind of a fragrance. It just has a very bright and uplifting experience for me. Let me know if you've sampled this one or the previous 2 fragrances. Oh man, it's so clean. I also get a little bit of maybe citrus floral notes from this. They're not crediting it. Maybe something like orange blossom, lightly, not heavily. But for me, it's a nice combo of the juicy citruses with the aromatics and herbs and the woods. There's a bit of a grassy effect from the vetiver, and it's lightly spicy, but of course, there is that kind of aquatic marine thing, but it's not overwhelming. I'm not a big fan of aquatic marine fragrances. I like aquatics, less marine. This to me is a bit more watery, marine, sea breezy, if that makes sense. But fantastic fragrance, if I should say. But next, my favorite of the bunch of the new fragrances, not the Sculpture Parfum, but this Voyage on Orient is super delicious. So when I was testing this one out, I was getting a lot of holiday spices. It's so warm and spicy. Cinnamon and cloves are really prominent. But when I was testing it out, I said to myself, why am I reminded of rice pudding? So I grew up eating rice pudding. It was one of my favorite things to eat, but it was sprinkled a lot with cinnamon. And this gives me a lot of cinnamon, but for some strange reason, I also get lactonic milky notes. It's super creamy, but it's not creamy, smooth, and syrupy like molasses. There's a milky effect happening with the syrupy, molassesy touch in there. But there is a reminder of tobacco vanille. There is a little bit of a reminder of spice bomb. More tobacco vanille, I should say, a little less than spice bomb. But I feel like you get a bit of a combination of those 2 notes. But that milky lactonic creaminess is so super cozy. And the fact that it's overdosed with cinnamon and cloves, it gives me rice pudding vibes. I'm not saying it has rice in it. It's just the effect of the pudding itself, the custardy kind of milky, creamy rice pudding is how I experience the spices on top of it, if that makes sense. So it's got notes of amber, cinnamon, cloves, ginger, myrrh, and vanilla. And you are going to be reminded of tobacco vanille a little bit. You are going to be reminded of spice bomb a little less. But it does have a bit of a hint of it in there. But I think it's really, really nicely done fragrance. And out of all of the new fragrances, the 4 new ones, this is the longest lasting on me. And the fact that it has that more syrupy, creamy effect happening when I'm wearing it, it lasts longer for me. So not the next two, but one of the next two is also a bit on the dry side, so it doesn't have great performance on me because I have dry skin. But this one, I think it's the best in performance, quite long lasting, and the smell as well, really, really great. I love warm, spicy fragrances. I think the name is right, the color is right as well, the cinnamon, the amber, all of that stuff is just rightly done. Just like the previous fragrance, the MYKONOS Eau de Parfum Fresh is the color is exactly right, and this color is fitting as well. But really, really yummy. That whole custardy, milky rice pudding kind of an effect is really appropriate here. More on the skin rather than the strip, but it's an overdose of spices, lots of them, and a lot of amber here and vanilla. Really nicely done for a designer. I don't want to say it's niche quality because Tom Ford's Tobacco Vanille and Spice Bomb by Victor and Rolf are not niche houses, but there's definitely something a little elevated quality smell wise here compared to other designer fragrances, if that makes sense. So Voyage on Orient, definitely my favorite. And some of the databases say it's a feminine targeted release. I find that to be unisex, if not even leaning a bit on the masculine side. So it's a really, really great fragrance. That's the one I highly recommend for you guys to check out. So the thing I wanted to mention also, I actually featured every single one of these except for the MYKONOS in a video of upcoming new fragrances. So you might have already heard about these fragrances and the fact that I'm looking forward to sampling them. So I'm glad I'm doing a video on all the fragrances together. And I believe what happened was the Voyage on Orient launched in early part of 2024, and then later these two were announced together. So Sculpture Reverie and Sculpture Air de Lune, they launched together. So those were the most recent fragrances that launched from the house of Nikos Parfums and in the Sculpture series. But we're going to talk about Reverie first, Sculpture Reverie. This is a fragrance created by Corinne Vinchon-Spehner, and I'm not finding perfumers' names on all of the fragrances, but I was able to find a perfumer here. It's interesting. Corinne Vinchon-Spehner, I believe, works for Robertet, and the perfumer that did the original, Michel Almairac, also works for Robertet. I wonder why he wasn't the one that created the Parfum edition. Something must have happened there. But let's talk about Reverie. Sculpture Reverie is a 2024 launch. It's featuring notes of rose, saffron, cherries, red peppers, bourbon vanilla, patchouli, cacao, musk, orange, amber, broom, black and red pepper, and orange blossom. Lots going on here. This isn't the one that's very dry on me. The next one, which I prefer a little more in smell, but very dry and very short-lived on my skin for some strange reason. This one is almost as good as the Voyage on Orient, but as a smell, it's not my most favorite smell, and you'd think this is like Lost Cherry. It's definitely not. For me, the rose and saffron are dominating here. They're also giving you a bit of a Middle Eastern vibe. That saffron, whenever I see it in fragrances, I always think of something that smells a bit more Middle Eastern, slightly leathery. The cherry does come in, but I feel like the rose and the saffron cover it up. You experience a fruitiness. You experience the cherry-like qualities, fruitiness, but it's kind of smeared over with a lot of rose and saffron, so it doesn't dominate as much. But it's quite spicy for sure. The red peppers and the peppery spices are here. But, you know, it's sweetened up with the bourbon vanilla and the earthy notes and the chocolate or cacao that's in here. I think it's nicely done, and it wears quite nice on me and also longer lasting than the last fragrance, which is called Air de Lune. But again, it's not my favorite scent profile. It's quality work, I should say. Let's quickly smell it. Sculpture Reverie from the house of Nikos Parfums. If you've sampled it, let me know. And what do you get? Do you get a lot of cherries from this? I feel like there's a slight cherry vibe, and I think cherries as a fruit are trendy to use in fragrances. But to me, this is not a cherry bomb. This is not Lost Cherry. This is not cherry or cherry punk. It's not any of the cherry fragrances out there. It's its unique creation. And the fact that the rose and the saffron are here so prominent, you know, wiping out the cherry qualities, I feel like this is not a cherry fragrance, even though it features cherries. But it's nicely done. Again, it's not my favorite scent profile, I would say, but it's definitely longer lasting than the last fragrance, which I kind of prefer the smell of more than Reverie. But sadly, I didn't have very good performance with this one. So this is Air de Lune, the last fragrance I'm going to talk to you about. I don't know who the perfumer for this one is. It's bourbon vanilla, patchouli, plums, pralines, mandarin, musk, tagette or marigold is what it's also known as, orange, and cloves. I have to say, this one has old school vibes. I don't know why. It gives me old school vibes, like something from the 80s for men. I don't know why. But for some strange reason, the color doesn't make sense for this one. I don't know why the color is this color. This Reverie, the coloring totally makes sense because it's red rose, the cherries, the saffron, all very similar colors. But here, this coloring does not make sense to me. But I am getting old school vibes. It's maybe even slightly animalic. That's what's giving me. Maybe it's musky more than animalic, and that's what's giving me the old school vibes. But I think it's just the way the notes are combined together to kind of create this kind of fragrance experience. I feel like the vanilla patchouli combo is prominent next with plums, but the pralines, it just sweetens things up, I feel like. And then the musk dominates. I like the way it smells. It reminds me of some fragrances, but I can't pinpoint what they are exactly. It's not a gourmand as much, but for sure it's got major old school fragrance vibes. Something classic and modern mixed together, and I feel like it's the patchouli in here and the musk together giving me something a bit old school. I don't want to say it reminds me of Kouros, but I'm getting that kind of a vibe. What do you guys think? It doesn't last. The old school vibes doesn't last, but it's there. For sure it's there. So that's why I'm thinking it's a bit old school, even though it just came out in 2024. That is Air de Lune from the house of Nikos Parfums, Sculpture Air de Lune. Let me know if you get the old school vibes on this one. It does have a bit of a slight musky, Kouros-like vibe. I think that's a breath of fresh air, but for me, this one is dry wear on me. It didn't last as long as the previous two, but I think you can intensify your sprays and get away with it. But I feel like it's a solid collection of fragrances from a brand that is hardly known. It's a Greek brand, and my favorite is Voyage on Orient. You gotta get your nose on this one. It's so good. But just keep in mind, it's going to remind you a little bit of Spice Bomb from Victor and Rolf, and most importantly, Tobacco Vanille from the house of Tom Ford. But for me, I get milky, lactonic quality from it, especially on skin, and giving me hints of when I was eating, cinnamon-covered rice pudding. But I think the collection is solid. Great designer fragrances for men and women. So let me know if you've sampled these, and let me know which one is your favorite. If you haven't sampled them, do let me know which one sounds great to you. Add a comment below. Otherwise, guys, thanks so much for watching today. If you have any questions or comments, please do list below. Please like this video. Please share it. Follow me on Instagram and Facebook, and I'll be back with more videos very soon. Have a good one. Goodbye.